And joining us, here he is. He's getting ready to host the Big Draft Sports Center tonight on ESPN. Philadelphia's own hometown hero, Kevin Negandhi. Kev!
Man, how we doing? You got the boys in there? I love that. I love that the boys are with you today.
Well, it's Take Your Kids to Work Day.
Love that.
So I figured the perfect thing. They got the day off from school to come to work with Daddy. And you know better than anybody, you know, it's the best time when you get to spend a day with your boys.
Brother, there is nothing better than that. And then at the same time, like at the end, they think that you work at basically a Disney World, Disneyland. They want to keep on going. There's nothing better than that experience with your kids there. So what's up, guys? Good to see you guys. I heard so many things about you.
Good to see you too.
Uncle Kevin's got boys your ages. So we're all going to get together and go to a Phillies game. Right, Kev?
That would be a blast. Yeah, by the way, my 11-year-old, I'm on the set of SportsCenter last night, and you would have loved this. It's like 6:51. We just did a segment with Saban and Herb Street and Dez, and I'm wrapping up with Orlovsky. And my wife sends me video. My boy hit a inside the park home run. But the thing is, a legit one. It wasn't one of those little league ones.
Right.
Like he hit one to the wall. And his speed was so fast that by the time the right fielder got it, he was rounding second, coming down to third, and he scored, and it was cool. And I have it on video, and honestly, I'm here at the draft. I have I'm on the ESPN set, and behind us, which was really cool, the entire time we did the show, they had the ESPN, the pick is in Eagles behind us, the graphic.
Yeah, I saw the picture. I loved it with the Eagles in back of you.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And the crazy thing is that, while it's what I love and all that, I wanted to just yell it to the rooftops that my boy hit the inside the park home run. I wanted to say that on SportsCenter. So those are those amazing moments, and I'm glad my wife got it on video. So I just want to tell you boys, your dad's proud of you, man. He loves sharing stories with me.
The two of us, man, it's the best. Hey, do you watch the Game Changer app sometimes when you can?
I do. I watch the Game Changer app the whole time. That keeps me going. We got it for travel basketball, travel baseball, and Little League. So it works out great.
It's so funny because, when we're working and we can be interviewing, whether it's Saban or you name it, right? And you see Negandhi up, right? And you're like, oh my God, please. And for those people, the Game Changer app basically is the ESPN Gamecast. So you'll see it come, and you'll see where the ball goes, if they hit it, or it'll say strike or ball. So you're dying with every pitch, and you keep waiting for it to refresh to find out how your kid did.
Yeah. And at the same time, it not only does it do that with the Game Changer, it's like the Gamecast, like you mentioned. If you have a parent that's willing to give up their own phone, you could watch the game that way. And at the end of the game, they accumulate highlights, and then they send you the highlights of your son or daughter and what they did from the game video, which is pretty amazing.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I got my little one who does who's travel baseball, and he has all his highlights, and he has his own YouTube channel. So Yo Kid Sports Junior, and he'll put his highlights on the Yo Kid Sports Junior.
That's really cool. By the way, am I too dark here? I just realized that.
You look fabulous.
I'm stepping
you look great. Well, let's get down to it. This draft is going to be fascinating between the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, the trades for the quarterbacks. I mean, what's the latest you're hearing with trades?
So I feel like the Chargers are basically in the best spot, sitting there with Harbaugh, because they need to have more picks. Yet you've got the Vikings that need a quarterback. It feels like that's the natural thing. And the stuff I was hearing last night, though, was that the Vikings would love to go after Drake May, but I heard the Patriots aren't giving up that third pick no matter what. So I'm very curious to see if it plays out like this, where the Chargers are on the clock, or the Cardinals are on the clock, and the Cardinals are hearing any offers. And the Chargers are going to basically say, hey, Minnesota, give us what you got. And I've heard Minnesota doesn't want to give both those first-round picks.
Wow.
And unfortunately, if you want to get in the top 5, you've got to give up those 2 first-round picks, right? So do they pass on? Like, do we see no trades? And we see potentially a wide receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr., going to Arizona at 4. Do we see right there at 5 that the Chargers cannot get the package that they want from Minnesota, and then they go offensive lineman, right? Which would be a big mistake to me, because they need that 11 and 23 if they can get it, right? Because then you could potentially get an offensive lineman at 11 and potentially a wide receiver at 23 in a first round that's stacked with that, right? But do you go with an offensive lineman, and then what do the Giants do? What do the Giants do at 6? Because the last time they were sitting at 6 a few years ago, they went with Daniel Jones. Do the Giants then go with J.J. McCarthy and then do a full reset and figure things out? Because they clearly regret the contract they gave Daniel Jones. And then the scenario could be, do the Vikings just sit there and say, maybe J.J. falls in our lap at 11? Because if you look at, 7, 8, 9, those, they don't need quarterbacks. I mean, 9 specifically, it's the Bears, right? And then potentially, do you have the jockeying of a team like the Broncos or the Raiders that are sitting there at 12 and 13 that jump over the Vikings and try to move up? The problem is that both those teams don't have the assets to make a big move inside the top 5, top 8, because of, the Sean Payton trade, the Russell Wilson. They don't have the assets, the Broncos, even though they desperately need a quarterback. And then I'll tell you another thing, Ant. Let's just play the scenario out, and we're at 12 and 13. Do we see specifically Sean Payton go Bo Nix at 12? And then do we see the Raiders decide they need to get a quarterback and Michael Penix at 13? Or do those 2 teams pass, or specifically like the Raiders, do they pass and then try to get back into the back end of the first round to get Michael Penix Jr.? So, there's all those scenarios out that can play. I think the draft will potentially begin at 3 with what the Patriots do.
It's unbelievable. And the quarterbacks are all so interesting, Kev. So let's talk about JJ for a second. And
yeah,
the only thing that mystifies me is, remember, there were games where he didn't throw it. The Penn State game, he didn't throw it at all in the second half, right? Like, that wasn't what Harbaugh did, and yet he has rose significantly. Now, he's incredible in interviews, really smart, right?
Yep.
Like, he seems very polished. What does he project as an NFL quarterback? Physical tools. What do you see from those, Kev?
So here's the thing with J.J. McCarthy. Dan Orlovsky and I have talked about this multiple times, and Dan is 100% right. If, let's just say the Vikings find a way to get J.J. McCarthy, whatever rookie quarterback that goes to the Vikings will be rookie of the year potentially, and within 2 years could be MVP in that conversation just because of what's around them.
Right.
You have Justin Jefferson. Yeah, you can do a lot of things. I love Kevin O'Connell. I think he's a really smart guy. So, it's hard to measure J.J. McCarthy, but I'll tell you what, it's a different viewpoint when you watch him on a Giants team that has basically nothing, right? When it comes to options, if you're comparing the Vikings to the Giants and how an offense looks. So it's really hard to gauge. If you have Michael Penix Jr., if the kid stays on the field and you are protecting him, you got a potential game changer because of his arm. Michael Penix Jr. can beat teams because of his arm. You can't say that about J.J. McCarthy. You can't say that about Bo Nix. So I think it's just the situation, the roster around you, and then do you have the right coaching to make sure that you're putting the quarterback in the right spot? I think J.J. McCarthy, I hate the word game manager, but he's not in the top tier of quarterbacks. He's not in the top one of those 3 that we're talking about. And you could even make it it's 2 tiers at the top, and that is Caleb Williams by himself, Jaden Daniels, Drake May in tier 2, and then J.J. McCarthy potentially in tier 3. I've talked to some scouts that have Michael Penix actually and Bo Nix ahead of J.J. McCarthy. They're just not talking about it. I've talked to some guys that have Michael Penix. Literally, if the medicals were right, Michael Penix Jr. would be going in the top 5 because his arm talent is incredible. I was in a discussion last night with a bunch of NFL guys, and we were talking about the scenario. Like, he's a lefty, big arm, of course, that, like, if they were given the option of Tua Tagovailoa or Michael Penix Jr., they would have taken Michael Penix Jr. And I was like, whoa, why? And they just love his arm. And they were talking about, look at the talent. You got Waddle and Tyreek, and I know Penix can hit those guys deep at all times. And I was like, wow, that's how much respect they have with the arm talent that Penix has.
I mean, it's funny. I love him. I had him on early in the process, and he throws outside the hashes like nobody else. Like, you know, I mean, he'll drop in a bucket. Now, I do worry about the middle of the field a little bit and how he sees that. But, like, to your point, his arm is ridiculous. I mean, and look, here's what's so impressive about the kid. The kid makes Indiana a top. You remember they had Rose, I think, the number 8 at the time. Nobody knows better than you.
They almost beat Penn State that game.
Yes,
they were.
Yes. So he resurrects that program. He goes to Washington. Roma Dunzier and a couple of other receivers were going to leave. So he talked them into staying, right? So he's got his leadership. And, like, dude, that Texas game was one of the greatest games I've seen a quarterback play.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'll add to that first Oregon game.
Yes.
The guy was fearless. I always talk about this. He's not afraid of the moment. You want players that are not afraid of the moment. Like, he was unbelievable in that Oregon game. And then he just smashed them in the Pac-12 championship. To me, like, Penix Jr., listen, he had four season-ending injuries, 2 on the knee. The question is also about the shoulder. Like, but if you could protect him, and I think you could say that a lot about quarterbacks, but if you could protect this young man, his leadership already in the huddle is immediate. And don't you want you have the face of a franchise, somebody who can command the huddle. I really like Michael Penix Jr. I was actually talking to somebody this morning, and I don't understand the knock over the last 3 to 4 months on Drake May as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about him.
I love him.
Yeah, because here's the thing. You know, he lost a ton last year, right? Like, when you lose a stud running back, a stud receiver, part of your offensive line, and you play at North Carolina.
And you're the coordinator.
Right?
Yeah, and your OC.
Yeah, like, what do you think's going to happen?
So the problem with Drake is people will turn on that Virginia game. That was a bad Virginia team, and they lose. They'll turn on the Georgia Tech game. They'll be like, where's the quarterback making plays? I think I know Mac Brown really well. I think Mac will tell you the kid hasn't changed from 2 years ago, where he's projected to be, you know, going head-to-head with Caleb Williams as the number 1 guy, to where he is now. He can work those things out. I will say this. If the Vikings find a way to sweeten up a deal and move to 3, and the Patriots say it's too sweet of a deal, we need to trade him out, Drake May going to the Vikings, sitting a year behind Sam Darnold, Drake May will be a top 10 quarterback within 2 to 3 years. He is that good immediately. Well, I shouldn't say immediately. He's that good when he gets the chance to play on the field. Yeah. Like, so when you have Darnold there for that one bridge year, I think he would be phenomenal in that system. I really like Drake. I love the other 2 quarterbacks, Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. I don't know what Washington was trying to do with that quarterback powwow last week with the 4 quarterbacks that he brought in. They wanted to see how they all reacted. I think you're just messing with the kid's head. And I'm sure they're going to be like, well, you know, let's see how tough he is. Well, listen, if you want a franchise quarterback, show a commitment to him. And Daniels, I think, is so electrifying. Some of the plays he did, guys, like especially in the SEC. And Ant, this is the thing that stands out with Jaden Daniels the most. Versus the Blitz last year, okay? In the SEC, 17 touchdowns, no interceptions, completed 70% of his passes.
Wow.
Don't you want that in a quarterback who handles adversity? Like, that's insane. So that to me, like stands out more than anything else on handling the pocket, handling some of the things that you're not planning on, and you find a way. 17 touchdowns, no picks, and you're completing 70% of your passes. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, so I got to ask you about, let's talk birds, because so Dave Graziano throws out the Brock Bowers thing, right? Like, so
Oh yeah.
while we both probably don't feel like that's going to happen. Let's dream for 1 second, though.
Okay.
Would you do it? Like, because I love Bowers. I think he's one of the great. I almost think he's underrated as a weapon in this draft.
So it's interesting about Bowers. Okay, so if you go track record for tight ends in the first round, not good. They don't hit. I mean, look at the most legendary tight ends that we've seen over the last 20 years. They were not first round picks.
No,
The
Kyle
Kelce's,
Pitts,
the Gronks, the Goddards,
yes.
right? The Kyle Pitts is a perfect example. Brock Bowers, though, as a prospect, the tight end is not looked at a certain level here. But Brock Bowers as a prospect is potentially a top 5 player in this draft.
Yes,
he's that good, man.
Yes,
his ability to make plays and his hands are incredible. The most interesting thing about tight ends, though, especially when you look at pay scale, they're still down here. And if you're going to, let's just say, what we're seeing with the numbers with wide receivers are just so elevated, and quarterbacks and tackles, like when you got to pay those guys in that second contract, tight ends aren't getting that. So if you're managing a certain cap, Bowers would fit in perfectly down the road when you have that built-in system. Okay, I'm adding all that stuff because I think picking Bowers for a team like the Eagles is like a luxury.
Of course.
The Falcons picked Kyle Pitts as we need you now immediately. I think Bowers to us is like, hey, we've got a lot of parts. Let's just add this. That's kind of how I view if the Eagles potentially decided that, you know what? Let's go get Brian Thomas. To me, that would be a luxury.
By the way, is another underrated problem. Listen, you got neighbors next to you, so I get it. That kid is legit.
He's legit, man. He is legit. And whoever's going to get him in the teens is getting a monster guy that doesn't make the tier 1 of the wide receivers. But we also know the track record with Howie and what this team needs. This team needs some offensive line depth, defensive line potentially. And the way this draft shakes out, it actually favors the Eagles at 22.
Yeah.
Because there are a handful of teams that need quarterbacks in front of them, a handful of teams that need wide receivers in front of them. There's not a lot of defense off the board in the beginning. You may see your first defensive player at 8, right, to the Falcons. And then when you need cornerback, you have Jacksonville that's in front of you that needs cornerback. But Jacksonville may go Brian Thomas, or the Colts at 15. They may go with Brian Thomas. So then that gives you the ability that you could get the number 1 cornerback by moving up, or you could sit there at 22 and get the number 2 cornerback, right? So all those things play into this. And the other benefit that the Eagles have specifically is this is a dominant offensive tackle first round. And you can get 4th, 5th best offensive tackle on the board at 22 and then put him with Stoutland for a year, and you're good to go. And that could be Guyton from Oklahoma. That could be Mims, who, when you look at his talent, the projection, he could be the number 1 tackle in this draft years from now because of the talent that he has.
I think you're right. I think this draft works out perfectly for the Eagles because of all the quarterbacks, because of the great receivers. And listen, you can get guys that come in and play guard, and then you kick him out the tackle if need be for lane, like long down the road.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, there's some...
Slide them in. Like we've seen with Juergens and Dickerson. You just slide them in. We're ready. We've been waiting. And that would be the Eagles' way here. Or the thing I've been hearing a lot is they've got a guy, and they're going to move up to get that guy. And that could be in the teens. That could be a Quinyon Mitchell. I love Quinyon Mitchell.
I was going to ask you, Mitchell or Arnold, do you like better?
I love Quinyon Mitchell. Now, listen, Arnold is coming from Alabama and Nick Saban, so it's hard to argue. Yeah, and I think Howie's learned his lesson through the years that, hey, I'm going SEC first if I'm going to go by default over the last couple of years, right? If you look at the way he's drafted. Quinyon didn't allow a touchdown. This is a number. In 402 coverage snaps this past year. Didn't allow a touchdown. Now, the other thing is the question of, when you look at Arnold and Mitchell, what's the fit in Fangio's defense, right?
Right.
I'm not sure if Quinyon fits as much as what maybe Arnold would fit when we talk about press coverage, specifically with whatever Fangio likes to deploy. So to me, if you can get the number 2 cornerback, you can get the 4th or 5th offensive lineman sitting there at 22, I'm okay. But if you want to move up, I got to tell you, I kind of trust Howie on all this because he's earned my trust over the last couple of years.
Well, it's funny because I looked at it and I was telling the guys, I feel pretty calm from an Eagle standpoint because I don't think they can go wrong, right? Like, again, like you just said, the cornerbacks play out the way they do. I mean, I don't know how you feel about Kool-Aid. Now, going into the season, Kool-Aid was the better cornerback, and Arnold surpassed them. But, like, you can't go wrong. You got corners sitting there, and you got, like you said, all the offensive linemen. What do you think about Laiatu Laitu?
Man, I love that guy. He is such an interesting – so first off, he's the best defensive end in the draft.
Yeah.
Like, the best defensive end in the draft. The issue is, of course, the medical. I mean, he retired. If the kid stays healthy, when you put him on the field, his speed, he's going to make plays.
Yes.
He's going to be in the backfield.
Yeah.
Right? So I find that interesting that if Latu is somebody that they look at, it's like, okay, the way we have Nolan Smith on one side and Latu on the other, do we have our bookends for the future over the next 3 years, right? So I like, and of course Huff, but Latu is one of those guys that I think is going to be off the board before the Eagles get the pick if they sit at 22. I think the only thing that will disappoint Eagles fans is this. The only thing, because I think we've come to this conclusion that Howie will go lineman regardless, and if he doesn't go lineman, he'll get a potential cornerback, and if we don't go cornerback, then he's getting Brock Bowers, right? I think the only thing that will disappoint Eagles fans tonight is if they trade out of the 22 spot and trade down in the first round or into the second to collect assets or get a first for next year. Because let's just play another scenario out. If Penix is still on the board, if there's a team that feels like they've got to move up like the Raiders and they have to jump in to still get Penix, I could see the Eagles being a dancing partner like they were with the Ravens a few years ago with Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's funny. I think the Raiders should take Penix early because I mean, first of all, he's a great fit for the Raiders, and he's the bomb thrower, and he's lefty. You go back to Ken Stabler, right? The snake, the whole thing. So but you're right. Like, and I do think if they trade out of that first round, that would be the only boo. We were talking about what would you boo? Like, to me, you can't boo offensive line. It wins. So you can't boo it. So, the only way you're right, you boo is if they trade out, because then it's shades of Marcus Smith. Remember that?
Yeah. They lost their guy, and then you got to panic. And I think going through all of that, listen, Howie Roseman deserved to be criticized through the years with the way he approached the draft. But every time he makes a mistake, he learns from it, he corrects it, he figures it out, and it pays off. And it has paid off. I mean, since the Rager pick, it's really hard to argue with how he has approached the first round, right? And what he has done on draft day, acquiring A.J. Brown, going Devontae Smith, understanding that we got to attack defense with Jalen Carter and moving up. The Jordan Davis pick because it fell to them. I understand people will say, well, we should have got the safety in Baltimore. I totally get that. But he's following what the needs are and filling the space gaps. And it really comes down to this. We won't fault Howie for these picks. It's now up to the picks to kind of make Howie look good.
Right.
Especially the Georgia class.
Yes.
Right? the Georgia guys. They've got it like Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith. Make Howie look good. You can make a Keely Ringo. You can make a case for N'Kobe Dean. You got to make Howie look good because he believed in you, and the picks looked right at the time. Now you've got to prove it and stay healthy on the field.
Nah, you're so right. Hey, before I let you roll, and I thank you for your time as always, Kev.
Oh yeah,
we love our weekly visits. I gotta bring this up to you. So this is the coolest thing in the world. You're anchoring draft coverage, right? Sports Center in Detroit. And I know that you and I we were separated at birth. And you were watching the draft growing up as a kid on ESPN when it was rudimentary, right?
Yep.
When it was Chris Berman and it was Mel
And
back
Piper.
in the day.
Yep.
And it was on Saturday, right? There was no primetime Thursday.
Yes.
And we'd wake up early and we'd be so excited for draft day. Give me some of your memories of watching, especially ESPN. Like that was a big deal for us watching ESPN draft day.
It was huge, and it was Saturday and Sundays. And leading up to the week, I would get the Sports Illustrated with Dr. Z's mock, who was like the first one who was doing a mock, right?
Yes.
And then I would
Paul Zimmerman,
look everything up and see how accurate everything is and does everything match up. But listen, you got to love it. You got to be a nerd to understand this. And I'm a proud nerd when it comes to this stuff. Like, I remember specifically, like it was the late 80s, and I was out with my boys on the weekends playing, wiffle ball outside. And then I would come in and be like, hey, guys, I'm going to take a break here. And they're like, why? I'm like, I want to watch the rest of this 5th round. And they're like, what? And there was like this one linebacker for the Browns that I think it was like Trey Junkin. And I was just watching his profile, and it was like going on, and the graphics were all old school, but to me, it was the coolest thing. And anything Mel said, and he had the big binder, I just loved it. And I get a kick out of, I've done 10 mock drafts with Mel Kiper in the last 2 months, like these shows with him. And I just get a kick. He's the nicest human being, the greatest guy. He's a genius. This is his Christmas day. And to be able to work with him and call him a colleague, to be able to cover this, it's pretty darn cool. And then it combines my two biggest loves, college football and the NFL, all together. So this to me is my favorite event of the year. And to be here, to be a part of it has been pretty cool, man. Like, it's one of those cool experiences that 49-year-old Kevin Negandhi is like telling 15-year-old Kevin Negandhi. And you know that, and we have had those moments before where you're like, yeah, man, like, you're telling little Anthony, right? Like that dream that you had, like we're actually living it, So it's pretty amazing.
It truly is. And you think back to when the coverage of it, how rudimentary, right? And now it's just incredibly polished. It's amazing how it is. Like it's so cool, man. I remember. You remember when Buddy drafted Keith Byers and he called him the medical reject?
Yeah. You know what? So the night he drafted him, I was at like a little carnival circus, like in my neighborhood. And I remember coming down the slide and somebody's like, yeah, the Eagles drafted a guy named Keith Byers. And I was like, wait a second. And this is how crazy. I said, the Ohio State running back who had foot issues? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, what are we doing? And honestly, I was really, really young, but I was so into that stuff and understanding what was going on. And there were some bad drafts that we experienced, right? Like, I think that 1 year
Davis,
was
like, horrible. Oh my God.
Kevin Allen. Remember Kevin, who had some major issues, right?
Yeah, he was naked on a beach in Margate and did some horrible things.
Michael Haddix, like you just mentioned, like there were a couple of nightmare ones where we're like, what are we doing? And so it's nice to come out of that. And of course, we can't forget, and I think there's a new generation that understood the Mike Mamula dance and how we were in love with the combine, and that he's Mr. Combine, right? He's the one that kind of set this thing off.
You know what's amazing? I wrote a piece. It was in GQ. It was about the trainer who trained Mamula. He was like the genius behind the combine. So he was
Yeah.
out of Boston. So I think he worked out of like Boston College, actually.
Yes,
So
because that's where Momola was. Yep.
yes. So I go up and I see him how he's preparing these kids for the combine and like, 225, the shuttle. I mean,
Yeah.
and they were working on this thing, which makes sense, right? When you think about it now, well, of course, you could train as soon as the season's over, you could train for the combine drills. It's like studying for the test. You know what's
You're
on
right.
the test. And then
I
this
love
guy's
that.
the first guy who did it. And of course, we take Momola.
I love it. And by the way, Mike had a decent career.
He
It was
did.
the
It's not fair.
expectations coming
Right.
in.
Yeah.
And I will share one quick story, if you don't mind, with the
Please.
Momola. So I was at ESPN a few years ago on SportsCenter, commercial break. Bill Polian's there, and Bill's great to me.
Oh, fantastic.
And I mentioned the Momola pick. Bill went off on me because I was kind of criticizing the Momola pick, and and Bill lit me up. Like, he lit me up. And I found out later that I think Bill's son was invested in the Momola pick and understood it and all that. And like, it made me look at Mike Momola differently after that Bill conversation. Because I was like, Bill, you can't be serious. Like, I was coming from a different perspective on the expectations and stuff. And then Bill and I had a nice talk about it. And I looked into it and I was like, you know what? Mike wasn't as bad as we all portray it to be. And he found his way. We just expected that we were getting a Hall of Famer because of the way the combine, like you mentioned, the unknown of the combine, and he was the combine freak show. And now we've come to the conclusion that, combine numbers are good, and it may push you over the top, but it shouldn't be the only thing that you look at. And I think that's kind of how we viewed it as a fan base when they went after Mike Momola.
All right, last thing, I promise. Favorite Eagle pick and worst Eagle pick in your life? You go, oh my God, no.
God. Oh my God. I mean,
Could be any. Doesn't have to be first round. Like Freddie.
Freddie.
Like, they needed Freddie to hit, right?
Yeah.
And I remember Andy was so sure about Freddie too.
Freddie Mitchell, right? We're talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yes.
Yeah. I was going to Fred Barnett. So, yeah, they needed Freddie to hit. Didn't hit, even though he'll tell you it hit. That was a tough one.
It was.
You brought up Smith, and Smith's a good one because it was like, wait, what are we doing? Like, what?
Yes.
Who? And then literally, like, we just knew that this wasn't going to work. The fireman.
Oh, Fireman Sam. Oh, my God. You took a 26-year-old guard from Baylor. Like, what? Easily the worst pick. I mean, all those bad offensive linemen they took in the 90s.
Davis from Tennessee, Richie Kotite. Yeah. We've been through some bad ones through the years, like some really, really bad ones. But it goes to show you here's the thing. For anybody who's listened to this too, it just goes to show you too. Don't think an entire draft is made up in the first round.
Right.
And I will add another thing. Look at what the Rams have done. This is the first time that they're picking since 2016 in the first round, since Jared Goff. They have built that team in the day 2, day 3. And look specifically at the Chiefs. You can't nail a pick all the time when you're picking 32. Look, they have built the team. They built that secondary on day 2 and day 3. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the Eagles and saying, oh, my God, and if you're mad about the day 1 pick. It's really what they do on day 2 and day 3, because you know and I know more than anybody. Day 2 is going to be probably the most critical for this Eagles team, especially adding depth on the defensive side. Are you getting linebackers? Are you getting a cornerback? If you don't go O-line in the first round, are you getting an offensive lineman? What are we doing day 2 and day 3 to fill the depth that we need to have the impact players?
Oh, spot on, brother. Spot on. And look, one of Howie's best drafts, he didn't have a first and he didn't have a third. And
you're right.
Right? I mean, and he takes and they take Mailata in the 7th round. I mean, that was a terrific draft. Now you're You're spot on. My brother, I love you. Listen, break a leg tonight. Huge. We're so proud. We got one of our own in Detroit hosting Sports Center, the draft edition. Everybody's got to watch. I'll be watching. We love you. What do you think, Sixers tonight?
I think they win, and I think honestly, this is a night where Joel and Tyrese. Tyrese is now 1A on this team, right?
Yeah.
And I think Joel gets that and needs that. And this is a night where these two guys work together, and it's not like, hey, it's just me. So I don't know what those balloons were all about. Like, what's that?
Well, I think it works. Whatever. It was great, man. Sixers win. Let the balloons go.
And I will pass on one other thing about tonight's game. The crowd needs to have the energy that we saw at Madison Square Garden. Let's not get tight if we're down. And they deserve to get booed that game against Miami because they were down 12 and they looked lethargic in the second quarter. But if it's a close game in the final 2 minutes, let's not get tight. Let's be loud as hell. Because it's important, because you saw how that changed the way that game played out in game 2 because of the crowd. I think the crowd played a huge role, of course, the referees. So let's just be loud.
I love it. I'm going to show up the Garden. I'm completely with you. Love you, brother. Listen, kill it tonight, buddy. We'll talk to you next week.
Good seeing the boys. All right, take care.
Thanks, pal. Here he is, the great Kevin Negandhi, hometown hero.
We all silly like the mayor.